The year was late 2015, and the city of Briarwood, California, seemed like something out of a picture-perfect postcard. The streets, lined with manicured trees, curved gently through neighborhoods of elegant homes, their immaculate lawns carefully tended by gardeners who worked with precision. The sun shone through the leaves, casting soft, golden shadows that filtered down upon the sidewalks. Briarwood was the kind of place where the streets were always quiet, the neighbors always waved, and everything appeared perfect from the outside. From the outside, the Carter family seemed to embody the American dream. Sophia Carter, a stunning 32-year-old woman, lived in a house that could have been plucked from the pages of a luxury real estate magazine. She was the perfect wife, elegant, poised, and always dressed in the latest fashion. She held dinner parties where laughter and conversation flowed, and her house sparkled with the warmth of well-placed decor and bright, welcoming lights. On the surface, Sophia had everything anyone could want: wealth, beauty, and status. But behind the doors of their grand home, a far darker story was unfolding. Sophia stood by the large bay window in the living room, gazing out at the pristine street beyond. The view was familiar, calming, and yet it only served to deepen the ache that had become a constant in her life. As the world outside continued in its perfect rhythm, Sophia's life inside the walls of the house had started to feel like a cage. Daniel Carter, her husband of 8 years, was a well-known corporate lawyer whose career had reached incredible heights. He was a man others admired, a symbol of success, and his presence in their community was undeniable. Yet, for all his accomplishments, his attention was rarely ever on his wife. He had built a life of comfort and luxury for them, but it came at a heavy price: his absence. The silence in their home was suffocating. Most nights, Daniel came home late, exhausted from work, or worse, he wasn't home at all, his business trips stretching into weeks. When he was present, his mind was elsewhere, preoccupied with his next big case or a new business venture. Their conversations were dry, mechanical, about bills, schedules, or a new luxury item they should buy. He never saw how much she longed for his touch, for his affection. Sophia had tried to fill the emptiness with hobbies, with social events, with a busy schedule of entertaining. But no amount of charity work or fitness classes could drown the loneliness that crept into her heart every evening when Daniel's side of the bed remained untouched. At times, she would lie in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the bitter reality that her marriage, once passionate and full of promise, had now become a cold routine. One evening, as the last of the golden sunlight faded from the sky, Sophia sank into the plush armchair by the window, her eyes clouded with a mix of longing and frustration. She had once been full of life, a woman who had dreams, desires, hopes for a future filled with love and companionship. But now? Now, she felt more like a ghost, an accessory to Daniel's perfect life. Sophia's heart ached as she thought about the life she had always wanted, a life where love, intimacy, and connection weren't just words, but real feelings she could touch, experience. She missed the spark she had once had with Daniel. They used to laugh together, share dreams late into the night, but now all of that felt like a distant memory, a fleeting moment that had slipped away unnoticed. Her thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of her phone. She glanced down, and a small sense of relief washed over her when she saw the name on the screen: Robert Harper. It had been months since she had seen him in person, but he had become a familiar voice in her life. Robert, the former mayor of Briarwood, was not just a man of influence, he was a man who seemed to truly understand her. He always listened. He understood the loneliness in her voice, the longing in her words. There was something comforting about their conversations, something that felt right. Sophia's heart skipped a beat as she swiped the screen to answer. "Hello?" Her voice was light, though her hands trembled slightly as she held the phone to her ear. "Sophia," Robert's deep voice came through the line, calm, confident, and just enough to make her feel something stir inside her. "I was thinking about you. We should catch up soon. How about a drink this weekend?" The words hung in the air between them. Sophia's pulse quickened, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine something more than the hollow silence of her marriage. She imagined someone listening, someone who truly cared. And just like that, the door to the possibility of something more was cracked open. She wasn't sure if she wanted to step through it yet, or if she ever would, but it was there, a temptation she hadn't known she had been craving until now. The weekend arrived with a crispness to the air, as if the world was holding its breath. Sophia hadn't realized how much she had been waiting for the meeting with Robert until the moment finally came. The phone call had been brief, but it had left a lingering warmth inside her. She had thought about it all week, even as she carried on with her usual routine, pretending that everything was fine. But deep inside, a part of her had been craving something more, something real. Sophia stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the neckline of her dress. It was a simple black dress, flattering but not too extravagant, perfect for a casual evening out. She applied a coat of mascara, her reflection staring back at her with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. It wasn't that she didn't love Daniel. She did, but love had become an afterthought in their marriage. In its place had grown a silent, gnawing emptiness. And now, with Robert, she was at least feeling something again, a spark, a glimmer of life that she had missed for so long. Sophia's phone buzzed on the countertop, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text message from Robert, "I'm here. Can't wait to see you." Her heart skipped a beat, and without thinking, she grabbed her purse and stepped out of the house, the cool night air wrapping around her like a veil. The restaurant was a dimly lit, intimate spot, tucked away on a quiet street. The warm glow of the chandeliers and the soft hum of conversation filled the air, but the world outside felt far away. Robert was already seated at a corner table, looking effortlessly distinguished in his tailored suit. His presence in the room seemed to command attention, even though he wasn't trying. As Sophia approached, he stood, a smile spreading across his face. "Sophia," he greeted her warmly, his voice rich and inviting. "You look beautiful, as always." The compliment, though expected, still made her heart flutter. She had not realized how much she had missed hearing words like that, words that made her feel seen, cherished. They exchanged pleasantries, but the moment their eyes locked, everything else in the room seemed to fade away. Robert pulled out the chair for her, and they sat down, a comfortable silence falling between them for a few moments. The waiter approached, but Robert waved him off. "Just some wine for now," he said smoothly. "We have plenty to catch up on." Sophia felt a rush of emotions. She had met Robert at various charity events and parties over the years, but this was different. There was something more personal, more intimate about this meeting. For the first time in a long time, she felt as if she wasn't just a social figure or a decoration on Daniel's arm. With Robert, she felt like a woman, not a trophy wife. The mere thought sent a shiver down her spine. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately," Robert said, his gaze intense, yet gentle. "You don't seem like yourself, Sophia. I've always known you to be so full of life, and now," he paused, his expression softening with concern. "Now, you seem trapped." Sophia swallowed, unsure of how to respond. His words were so close to the truth that it almost hurt. He didn't know the full extent of her isolation, of her yearning for something more, but he saw through her carefully crafted exterior. And in that moment, she realized how desperately she had been longing for someone to see her, to acknowledge the emptiness she had been hiding for so long. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," she confessed quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I had everything, but it doesn't feel like enough. I feel invisible." Robert's hand reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers in a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through her. "You're not invisible, Sophia. You're far from it. You've been putting on a mask for so long that I'm not sure you even remember who you really are." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. His words were sharp, yet comforting, and they struck a chord deep inside her. She had been wearing that mask for so long, hiding behind the facade of a perfect wife, a perfect hostess, a perfect mother. But inside, she was falling apart. And Robert had just shattered that mask in a single sentence. The waiter arrived with the wine, and they shifted back into the rhythm of the evening, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that things had already changed. The conversation moved from one topic to the next, but every word Robert spoke seemed to linger in the air, pressing on her chest, making her feel both alive and terrified at the same time. Sophia was no longer just someone he occasionally spoke to at social gatherings. In his presence, she was a woman worthy of attention, of affection. The more they spoke, the more she realized how much she had been craving this. She had wanted to feel wanted again, needed. Robert made her feel that way. "Robert, I don't know if I'm ready for this," she said, the uncertainty in her voice betraying her inner turmoil. "I'm still married. I can't just leave everything behind." Robert studied her carefully, his gaze never leaving hers. "Sophia, you don't have to leave everything behind. You just have to take a step towards what you truly want. And what you truly deserve." His voice was firm, yet reassuring. "You deserve to be seen, to be loved, to be everything you've ever wanted to be." Sophia's heart raced. The words lingered in her mind, and for the first time in years, she considered the possibility that she could have more than what her marriage had become, more than the life she had resigned herself to. But as tempting as it was, the fear of the consequences, the weight of her commitments, all came crashing down on her. The night continued on, but Sophia's thoughts remained clouded, torn between the man she had vowed to spend her life with and the man who, in a matter of hours, had made her feel alive again. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but one thing was clear: her life, the one she had so carefully constructed, was about to change forever. The door to a new life had been opened, and Sophia was standing on the threshold, unsure whether to step through or turn away. Days turned into weeks, and the small, fleeting moments between Sophia and Robert had somehow turned into something more. What had begun as an innocent meeting, a shared drink at a dimly lit restaurant, soon evolved into secret meetings that both thrilled and terrified her. The more she saw him, the more she found herself wanting him, craving his attention, his approval. In Robert, she had found the escape she had been yearning for, a reprieve from the suffocating isolation of her marriage to Daniel. It was almost too easy to slip into the life Robert had offered her. His presence was intoxicating. He understood her in ways Daniel never had, listening without judgment, offering validation without hesitation. Every word Robert spoke seemed to peel away the layers of doubt that had been building inside her for years. With Robert, she didn't have to pretend to be something she wasn't. She was seen. But even as the thrill of the secret relationship grew, so did the gnawing sense of guilt in the pit of her stomach. Sophia wasn't a naive woman, she knew what she was doing. She knew that what she was feeling for Robert, what she was doing with him, was wrong. But it was so much easier to be with him than to face the painful reality of her marriage. It was easier to embrace the forbidden passion than to acknowledge the growing distance between herself and Daniel. Sophia's nights had become a whirlwind. Robert's phone calls, the stolen glances across crowded rooms, the secret exchanges that made her feel like she was living in a world of her own. But every time she returned home to Daniel, her heart sank a little more. She could barely look him in the eye anymore, knowing how deeply she had betrayed him. There was a part of her that still loved him, still wanted him, but that part was becoming increasingly distant, pushed further and further away by the increasing emotional pull of Robert. It wasn't just the guilt. There were other things, darker things, starting to cloud her mind. With Robert came an unsettling power dynamic that she hadn't anticipated. He was always kind, always charming, but his words, his gestures, sometimes felt like chains disguised as compliments. As much as she wanted to deny it, there was an undercurrent of control in their relationship. Robert was the one pulling the strings, subtly steering her thoughts and actions, making her feel as if she owed him something more than the fleeting passion they shared. The tension between them was not just emotional, it was something deeper, something that left her feeling both suffocated and liberated at the same time. One night, after a particularly heated exchange, Sophia found herself alone in her bedroom, sitting at the edge of the bed, her fingers lightly touching the fabric of her dress. She had just returned from another one of Robert's visits. This time, it had been different. The conversation had shifted from light-hearted banter to something more serious, more possessive. Robert had asked her, quite pointedly, about her marriage to Daniel. He had wanted to know why she stayed with him, why she hadn't left, why she wasn't with him instead. Because, Sophia had said, her voice trembling, I made a commitment. Robert had smiled then, his gaze calculating, almost knowing. Commitment, he had mused, is a beautiful thing. But I wonder, Sophia, how long you'll let that commitment keep you from being truly happy. She had been silent after that, unsure of how to respond. He was right. It wasn't just about commitment anymore. It was about control, about the way Robert made her feel like her life could be completely different, completely new, if she only took the leap. Now, sitting alone in the dim light of her bedroom, Sophia was left to wrestle with the consequences of her actions. She had never imagined that a simple flirtation could spiral so out of control, that she would find herself on the verge of throwing away everything for something that was, at its core, a lie. Robert wasn't offering her love. He was offering her a way out of the prison she had built for herself. But at what cost? Her thoughts drifted to Daniel, sitting alone in his office, lost in paperwork or a phone call, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface of their life together. He had stopped asking questions about her long ago. His indifference had become a background hum in their home. Sophia had hoped, once, that they could find their way back to the way things had been. But every passing day made that hope seem more and more like a fantasy. She had tried so hard, to rekindle the love she once felt for Daniel. She had made small gestures, tried to bring back the spark that had once filled their home. But Daniel had retreated even further, his eyes always fixed on his work, his phone, his career. He was a man who had built an empire, but in doing so, he had lost the very thing that made him human. He had lost her. And now, here she was, tangled in a web of lies, pulled between two men, one who was all too familiar, and one who made her feel more alive than she had in years. The guilt gnawed at her, but the thrill of Robert's attention silenced it, if only for a moment. The reality was undeniable, she was changing. And no matter how much she tried to deny it, she knew she wasn't the same woman who had stood at the altar, promising to love and cherish Daniel until death did them part. Sophia closed her eyes, trying to steady the storm inside her. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't quiet the voice in her head, the voice that whispered the same thing over and over, what happens when this all falls apart? She didn't have an answer, but deep down, she knew that the life she had built, the life that had once seemed so perfect, was unraveling. And once the thread started to pull, there would be no going back. The weeks blurred into one another as the forbidden relationship between Sophia and Robert deepened, its undercurrent of guilt and desire intertwining with every stolen moment. What had begun as a simple, private exchange of attention had morphed into something much more dangerous, a full-blown affair that was now impossible to ignore. Sophia felt the shift within herself, the way Robert's presence seemed to seep into her thoughts even when they weren't together. His touch, his words, his gaze, they all held a magnetic power over her. Each encounter left her feeling more alive than she had in years, more important, more seen. She found herself craving his attention, needing it like air. But beneath the thrill of it all, there was a growing sense of unease that she couldn't quite shake. It wasn't just the betrayal of Daniel, it was the way Robert made her feel, the control he seemed to have over her emotions, over her thoughts. It was on one of those stolen afternoons, when Robert had insisted they meet at his downtown loft, an intimate, elegant space filled with the scent of expensive wine and soft music playing in the background, that Sophia truly began to feel the weight of her choices. She arrived late, her pulse racing as she approached the door. Robert opened it with a smile, his face lighting up as he saw her, but there was something in his eyes now, something that spoke of possession. The way he looked at her had changed. It wasn't just admiration anymore, it was something deeper, more commanding. "Come in, Sophia," he said, his voice low, coaxing. "I've been waiting for you." The moment she stepped inside, the door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed through the loft, almost like a closing chapter in her life. Sophia stood in the middle of the room, caught between the allure of the man in front of her and the suffocating thoughts of what she was leaving behind. "You look beautiful," Robert continued, his hands grazing her shoulders, his touch gentle but insistent. "But I think you already know that. What I'm more interested in, though, is why you're still running from what you truly want." His words hit her with the force of a storm. He had been patient until now, but something about the way he said that, something about the way he looked at her, made her realize just how much he had come to expect her, not just desire her. Robert wasn't just giving her attention, he was demanding it. And in that moment, the line between affection and control blurred. Sophia tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain the guilt, the confusion? She didn't know anymore. She didn't know what was real or what was a lie, but she knew that Robert had found a way to carve a space in her life that had become too hard to ignore. As the evening wore on, they talked, their conversation flowing from the trivial to the deeply personal. Sophia opened up about her growing frustrations with Daniel, about how, for so long, she had felt invisible. She told Robert about the coldness between them, how it felt like they were living separate lives under the same roof. Robert listened intently, his hand never leaving hers, his gaze unwavering as he absorbed every word. "I don't know what to do," Sophia admitted quietly, her voice tinged with both frustration and longing. "I want to feel alive again. I want to feel like I matter." "You do matter," Robert replied, his tone soft but filled with a force that made her heart race. "You just need to make them see you. All you need is to make a choice." Sophia paused. His words hung in the air like a challenge, a dare she didn't think she was ready to face. A choice. It sounded so simple, but she knew it wasn't. She had spent years building a life with Daniel. A life filled with security, with comfort. But Robert had shown her a different kind of life. One filled with passion, intensity, and, at times, an overwhelming sense of freedom. The conversation drifted after that, but the tension between them had shifted. What had once been innocent flirtation had grown into something more complex, something that Sophia could no longer escape. As the night deepened, Robert's kiss grew more insistent. There was no longer any pretense, no longer any hesitation. This was it. She was no longer in control of the situation, she was swept up in it. Their lips met, and the kiss was as fiery as it was inevitable. It was a kiss of surrender, of acknowledging that the space between them had long been filled with unspoken desire. In that moment, Sophia felt the sharp contrast to the coldness of her marriage. There was nothing muted about this. It was raw, it was real, and for the first time in years, it made her feel alive. But even as her body responded, even as she allowed herself to be consumed by the kiss, a small, almost imperceptible voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings. She knew this wasn't right. She knew she was betraying Daniel in a way that was hard to justify, even to herself. But every kiss, every touch from Robert, pushed those thoughts further away. The following days were a blur of stolen moments. They met more frequently now, each encounter leaving Sophia feeling both exhilarated and suffocated. Robert's words echoed in her mind, "You just need to make a choice." And slowly, that choice became clearer. Sophia was beginning to realize that what she had with Daniel wasn't enough anymore. What she had with Robert, though, was something entirely different. Sophia knew she was in too deep, but she couldn't bring herself to pull away. The guilt was there, lingering at the edges of her consciousness, but it was easier to ignore than face the abyss of what her life had become. Every moment spent with Robert chipped away at her old life, her old identity. She was being rewritten, piece by piece, and for the first time, she couldn't say if she was ready to stop. But something deeper was at play here, something she couldn't see yet, something that would change everything. Sophia could feel the walls of her carefully constructed life beginning to close in around her. The affair with Robert, which had started as an escape, had now become a force she could no longer control. What had once been thrilling and liberating was now becoming suffocating, and the weight of her choices pressed down on her like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. The guilt that had been gnawing at her conscience now consumed her, eating away at every quiet moment in her life. She could no longer look at Daniel without feeling a deep sense of shame. The once affectionate, tender man she had married now seemed like a stranger, a man who worked late into the night, a man who came home tired and distant, offering little more than a distracted kiss and a vague promise to make it up to her one day. But Sophia no longer felt the desire to wait for that day. The air around her was thick with tension, and no amount of wine, social gatherings, or even Robert's soothing presence could wash away the growing anxiety. She knew something had to give. The life she had known, the life that was supposed to be perfect, was starting to crumble, and all she could do was stand by and watch it fall apart. Her interactions with Robert had grown more intense, his presence both an anchor and a weight. The more she saw him, the more she felt trapped between two worlds, one where she had built a life, and another where everything seemed possible. Robert had become the person she confided in, the person who made her feel desired and seen. But in his gaze, there was something else now, something darker, something possessive. He no longer simply wanted her attention. He demanded it. It was one evening, as Sophia sat alone in their luxurious living room, gazing out at the shimmering lights of Briarwood through the glass window, that the tension finally snapped. She had just returned from another secret meeting with Robert. They had shared a passionate kiss in his loft, their bodies entwined in a way that made her forget everything else. But as she left, something had shifted in her mind, something she could no longer ignore. Sophia felt the weight of Daniel's absence more than ever. She walked through their empty house, feeling like a stranger in her own skin. As she moved through the rooms, her eyes fell on the photograph of their wedding day, a younger, happier version of herself and Daniel, standing at the altar, eyes locked in a vow that now seemed painfully naive. The door to their home creaked open, pulling Sophia from her reverie. She turned to see Daniel entering, his expression weary but not unkind. He hadn't noticed her standing there, nor did he seem to notice the heavy air between them. His attention was fixed solely on his phone as he walked into the kitchen. Sophia could feel her heart beating in her throat, her mind racing with what to do next. She had never imagined that she would be here, on the verge of a decision that would shatter everything she had known. After a few moments of silence, Daniel appeared at the doorway, his gaze falling on her. There was an unsettling quiet between them now. He said nothing, but his eyes searched her face, as though looking for something, a sign, a change, a shift. "I think we need to talk," Sophia said, her voice shaking as she crossed the room toward him. Daniel raised an eyebrow, his tired face clouded with uncertainty. "What's going on, Sophia? You've been distant. And I don't know how to reach you anymore." The words hung in the air, a quiet accusation laced within them. He had been withdrawing for months, yes, but Sophia knew that now, he was finally asking the questions he should have asked long ago. Sophia hesitated, swallowing the knot in her throat. "I've been living a lie." Daniel's expression faltered for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he tried to process her words. "What are you talking about?" "I've been seeing someone else," Sophia confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Daniel, but I can't keep pretending anymore." The shock in Daniel's face was almost too much to bear. It was as though the ground beneath him had shifted, and he was left standing on unstable terrain. He took a step back, his hand instinctively reaching for the back of the chair. "Who?" he asked, his voice low, as if the question itself were too painful to ask. Sophia felt her stomach twist as she met his gaze. There was no easy way to answer, but she knew the truth needed to be said. "It's Robert," she whispered, and the name seemed to echo in the silence between them. The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel stood frozen, his face pale, his breath shallow. Sophia could see the anger building in his eyes, but it wasn't just anger. It was a deeper, more painful emotion, betrayal. The one thing he had tried to ignore for months was now laid bare before him. "Robert," Daniel repeated, his voice trembling. "How long?" "Months," Sophia admitted, unable to look away. "It started innocently. I didn't mean for it to happen, but... Daniel, I couldn't live this way anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when all I felt was empty." Daniel turned away from her, his hand gripping the edge of the counter. Sophia's heart ached as she watched him struggle to process her words, to make sense of the devastation she had just unleashed upon him. "I don't know what to say," he murmured, his voice rough. I thought I was doing enough. I thought my career, my work. I thought that was enough for you." Sophia's voice cracked as she tried to explain. "It wasn't about what you gave me, Daniel. It was about what we lost. I felt like I was invisible to you. And Robert, he made me feel seen. He made me feel wanted, alive again." "Alive," Daniel's voice was bitter now. "And what about our life, Sophia? Our family? Our vows? Does any of that matter?" Sophia swallowed, the weight of her choices crashing down upon her. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She could feel the immense loss, of love, of trust, of everything they had once shared. She could see the damage she had caused, and yet, a part of her was still drawn to Robert, still caught in the whirlwind of their affair. "I don't know if I can fix this," Sophia said quietly, the tears finally spilling over. "I don't know if you can ever forgive me." Daniel stood in silence, his shoulders slumped, defeated. "I don't know either, Sophia," he whispered. "But I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." The words felt like a final blow. It wasn't just the end of their marriage, it was the end of everything they had once believed in. Sophia watched him walk away, her heart shattering as the distance between them grew, knowing that there was no going back from this. The affair, the lies, they had torn apart the life she had once known. And as she stood there, alone in the quiet of their home, she realized that she had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The consequences of her actions had already begun to take root, and she had no idea how far the damage would reach. The silence that followed Daniel's departure from the room was deafening. Sophia stood alone, feeling the weight of her confession like a physical burden on her chest. The house, once full of life and warmth, now seemed cold and empty. Every step she took echoed in the hallway, a reminder of the life she had just destroyed. Sophia sank to the floor, her hands trembling as they pressed against her face. She had known the moment she chose Robert over Daniel that there would be consequences. But nothing had prepared her for this, the raw, agonizing pain of seeing the love of her life crumble before her eyes. Daniel had been right. He had been giving everything for their life together, but it had never been enough. It wasn't about his career or the house they built. It was about the emotional distance, the invisible wall that had grown between them. And now, it was too late. The affair had started innocently enough, but Sophia had known from the beginning that it was dangerous. She had told herself it was a temporary escape, a way to feel alive again, but now she was drowning in the consequences. Robert had become a force in her life, a presence she couldn't escape, and yet, even in the midst of the passion he offered, she found herself more trapped than ever before. But the truth was undeniable now. She had betrayed Daniel. She had chosen Robert, and there was no going back. The house felt like a tomb, suffocating her with its silence. The life they had built together had been reduced to shards of broken promises and unspoken words. As the hours passed, Sophia tried to steady herself, wiping the tears from her face, but the weight of guilt was overwhelming. Her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the stillness. She picked it up, her heart racing as she saw the name flashing on the screen, Robert. She hesitated for a moment before answering, unsure of what to say. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. "Robert, it's over. It's all over." On the other end of the line, Robert's voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. "What do you mean, Sophia? What happened?" "I told him everything," she said, her voice breaking. "I told Daniel about us. He knows. He knows everything." There was a long pause before Robert responded. "So, what now? You're just going to walk away from this? From us?" Sophia's heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time, she realized just how much power Robert had over her. His voice, so calm, so calculating, made her feel both desperate and trapped. "I don't know, Robert. I don't know what to do anymore." "What you do is up to you," Robert said sharply. "But don't think for 1 second that you can just walk away from me. Not after everything we've shared. Not after everything I've done for you." Sophia recoiled from his words. His tone had changed again, more demanding, more possessive. It was like the mask he wore had slipped, and now she could see the darker side of the man she had fallen for. The side that saw her not as a woman, but as an object, a possession to control, to manipulate. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling with fear and realization. "I thought I could, but I can't. This isn't love, Robert. This is just destruction." But Robert wasn't finished. His next words cut through the phone like a blade. "Don't pretend like you're the victim here, Sophia. You made your choice. And now, you'll deal with the consequences. All of them." Sophia hung up the phone, her breath coming in short gasps. The weight of Robert's words hung in the air, suffocating her. She had been right about him, about the way he had slowly taken control, about the way he had wrapped her in a web of lies, promises, and demands. She had thought he was her escape, but in the end, he was just another prison. She didn't know how much time had passed before she heard the sound of car tires in the driveway. Her heart stopped for a moment as she recognized the familiar sound of Daniel's car pulling into the garage. He had come home early. Maybe he had found the strength to confront her again, or maybe he just couldn't stay away. Either way, she knew it was time. Time to face the consequences of her actions, time to confront the fallout of the life she had chosen. The door opened softly, and Daniel stepped inside, his face haggard, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He looked at her for a long moment, the silence between them thick with tension. "Where is he?" Daniel asked quietly, his voice filled with barely contained rage. Sophia swallowed hard, struggling to find the words. "He's gone, Daniel. He's gone. But what we had, what we have, it's over." Daniel's gaze flickered with a mixture of disbelief and anger. He took a step toward her, his fists clenched at his sides. "Do you even understand what you've done?" he spat, his voice rising. "You've destroyed everything we built. You've destroyed me." Sophia felt the words strike her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say? What could she possibly say to make it right? Nothing would fix this. Nothing could undo the pain she had caused. "You don't get it, do you?" Daniel continued, his voice now cold and distant. You had a life with me, a real life. But you chose him. And now you're going to live with that. We are going to live with that. Sophia stood frozen as Daniel turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind him with a force that rattled the walls. It was final. The end had come, and there was no way to take it back. She had lost him, lost everything. The man she had loved, the life she had once known, it was all gone. Her phone buzzed again, and for a moment, she wondered if it was Daniel. But when she looked down, she saw that it was a message from Robert. Don't think you can walk away from me. I'll make sure of that. Sophia felt a cold chill run down her spine. She knew then that the consequences of her actions weren't just personal. They were much larger. Robert wasn't going to let her go so easily. The storm was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Sophia dropped the phone onto the floor, her body trembling with fear, regret, and the overwhelming weight of her choices. She had stepped too far into a world of lies, and now, she didn't know how to get out. The days following Daniel's confrontation were a blur. Sophia went through the motions of daily life, but everything felt surreal, as if she were walking through a dream that she couldn't escape. The house, once filled with the comfort of familiar routines, now felt like a prison, a place where every corner, every room, reminded her of the choices she had made. The silence was unbearable, but the hardest part was knowing that the man she had loved, the man who had been her partner for years, was no longer there. Daniel had left that night, taking nothing but his briefcase and his pride. He had warned her that he couldn't forgive her, not this time, not after everything. His departure was the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. The life they had built together was now reduced to memories of what could have been, to the haunting silence of an empty home. Sophia tried to call him, to apologize, to explain. But every time she reached out, Daniel's responses grew colder. His words became fewer, his answers more distant. He had made up his mind, and no matter how much she begged for his forgiveness, it was clear that the damage was too deep to repair. But it wasn't just the destruction of her marriage that tormented Sophia. It was the fact that, for all the passion and excitement Robert had brought into her life, she had never felt more alone. Robert had become a shadow in her world, a constant reminder of the lie she had been living. After their last conversation, where he had told her that walking away from him wasn't an option, the reality of her situation became painfully clear. Robert's manipulation had started to show its true colors. What had once seemed like affection now felt like control. His words, his demands, had all been designed to make her feel like she owed him something, that she was trapped in his world, and she had no way out. Every time she tried to distance herself, every time she thought about leaving him behind, Robert pulled her back in with promises of love, promises of a life that seemed so much more alluring than the one she had with Daniel. But deep down, Sophia knew it was all just a facade, a trap she had walked right into, and now there was no easy way to get out. One evening, after a particularly draining phone call with Robert, Sophia sat down on the couch in the living room, her hands shaking as they gripped the edge of the coffee table. The house was quiet, the shadows stretching long into the corners of the room, and she realized that she had come to the point of no return. The life she had once known was gone, and now she was left to pick up the pieces, though she wasn't sure how. She thought about her life before Robert, before the affair. She thought about the woman she had been, someone who had had hopes, dreams, and a future with Daniel. But in her quest for something more, for something that felt real, she had lost herself. She had destroyed the very thing that once made her feel secure, that gave her a sense of belonging. And now, as she sat in the darkened room, she felt the weight of her choices like a 1,000-pound stone pressing down on her chest. The next morning, after another sleepless night spent tossing and turning in bed, Sophia finally made the decision to leave the house. She needed to escape from Robert, escape from the memories of Daniel, escape from the life that had become a cage. She packed a small bag, as if running away from her own life, and left without telling anyone where she was going. The truth was, she didn't know where she was headed. But for the first time in months, the thought of being somewhere, anywhere else, gave her a shred of hope. As she walked away from the house, the weight of the past few months settled heavily on her shoulders. She had made countless mistakes, betrayed the man who loved her, and allowed herself to be consumed by a dangerous, manipulative affair. And now, she was left with nothing, no home, no family, no future. Sophia knew that the consequences of her actions would follow her forever. There was no going back. But as the morning sun broke through the clouds, she allowed herself to take the first step into the unknown. For the first time in a long while, she felt something that resembled hope, a faint flicker that maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild her life from the ruins she had left behind. But one thing was certain, she would never forget the lessons she had learned from her mistakes. The price of infidelity, of betrayal, had been more than she could have imagined. She had lost everything, and now, it was up to her to figure out how to move forward. This tale of love, betrayal, and the consequences of difficult choices has left us all with some important questions. Was Sophia justified in seeking something more? Or was it her own insecurity and desire for validation that led her astray? What would you do if you were in Sophia's shoes? Would you choose to stay and fix your relationship, or would you pursue your desires, regardless of the consequences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Robert's manipulation was a defining factor in Sophia's downfall? Or do you believe it was her own decisions that sealed her fate? Share your opinions with us. Hit that like button if you found the story compelling, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that dive deep into the complexities of human relationships and the consequences of our actions. Your thoughts and feedback are what keep us going, so leave a comment, share the video, and let's continue the conversation.